Happy Monday. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well. Happy Monday, Joe. How are you doing?
Good.
What have you been up to lately?
Last week I had a Snowflake summit, and then spent the remainder of the week. I was there till Wednesday, then spent the remainder of the week going to Escalante, Utah, with the family. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah,
Nice. Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful down there. I haven't been in a long time, but I'd like to go back sometime.
It ain't going anywhere. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Unless
How
we
about you?
start coal mining or something. Anyway, let's see. I was in Phoenix last week, which was it was a good experience. It was kind of an unforced error in the sense that it was getting up to like 109 and 110 every
Oh,
day.
that's
So it
right.
was
Yeah,
full
they had
on,
that big
full
heat
on
wave there.
furnace. But yeah, I was there for Generative AI Applications Summit. So that was a very nice conference. It's in parallel with another conference called Machine Learning Week. So yeah,
Yeah.
really good group. Lots of great conversations. Met lots of great people. Had really good discussions about AI safety and data and a lot of different things. So yeah.
The issue I have with calling your conference a generative AI conference is there are so many of them. Um, Like I was in London, I think 3 weeks ago, and I had to Google where I was supposed to go because there were like I think several generative AI conferences at the same time. And I was like,
It's
I hope I
pretty
clicked the wrong
nuts.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kinda crazy, like, same thing when I got invited to speak at this conference, I Googled it, and, like, it was so hard to find because generative AI conferences are everywhere. I assume that that will die down at some point, but who knows? Yeah, so Machine Learning
Um,
Week itself has been going through since 2009, so it's actually quite an old conference in this domain, and then Generative AI Application Summit, this was the 1st year, and so it's kind of like an add-on conference to the other one in a sense. So,
okay,
yeah.
cool. Getting some people in there here. What's up, Yon? Bonjour. Bonjour. What's up, Chris Tab? Yo, dudes, good to see you. Ramona, aka LinkedIn user, good to see you. John Cook, hey everybody, good to see you too, John. Chris and John and I were having a pints a couple weeks ago in London, so it's pretty
Did
cool.
Ramona make a little wager about the guest speaker today? Is that what the brownie is about?
Um, I don't know what kind of brownie she wants, but yeah.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, got a guest speaker coming up. That person will be here around the halfway mark, so you get to tolerate Matt and I for another
That's right.
25 minutes. But yeah, so it's a summer finale going on a summer break. But yeah, I guess we'll talk about some things in our mind. I have a lot of things in my mind, but what about you, Matt? What are some themes, topics that you've been thinking about lately?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, my talk last week ended up being really about AI safety and maybe some new approaches to it. And interestingly, there are several papers that have come out in like the last 2 weeks, and even on Friday, that address this issue as well. But basically, what it comes down to is that there is now quite a bit of evidence that the current approaches to trying to make models safe maybe aren't going to work so well. So, for example, GPT 4.0, how long did it take for it to be jailbroken? It took like a few days, basically. And so, meaning, the approach of like training on all this data on the internet, just training on as much data as possible, and then trying to undo the damage by training the model to behave during the instruct training phase, we're kind of struggling with that. And so I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but basically my talk was about how maybe it's time to apply some more traditional data notions of actually doing some data curation before we start training the model. And I'm not talking like the kind of super curation that we do in the data warehousing space, but at least like identifying data by scores and saying maybe this data here we shouldn't train on so much because it's going to cause us problems.
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Safety. Ha ha ha.
Yeah,
Safety.
exactly.
But safety is also a word that my kids use when they fart. And so,
Okay.
so it's like when yeah they'll do their thing and then say safety. So that's the kid thing. But where this ties in to AI is I feel like I'm having to undo the damage of my kids looking at YouTube and Instagram and learning a bunch of bad behavior, right? And so they
Yeah.
consume
Yeah.
all this stuff nonstop, and um, that's just how it is. As a parent, I'm a pretty crappy parent, to be frank, in this regard. But it's sort of like, yeah, having to untrain the model now. I don't think that that's possible. I mean, my kids,
Yeah.
they're crazy, and this is exactly. I think it's equivalent to an AI model. You can't really. I mean, it's about the inputs, right?
Yeah. You can create a veneer of like civility or something, but then it's very easy to get around that, it turns out. So yeah, I think the other interesting thing in terms of papers and research is that Anthropic released a paper about what they call Golden Gate Claude. And what they did is they discovered that they could identify activations of specific neurons on specific concepts. And so you can show this model, it's a like bimodal, visual plus text. So you can show this model a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge, or you can type something about the Golden Gate Bridge, and they discovered that certain neurons would light up when you did that. And so they messed with the weights around those neurons. I've got to read the whole paper to understand exactly what they did to like hyper emphasize the Golden Gate Bridge. And so as a consequence, this model only wants to talk about the Golden Gate Bridge ever. So it's trained in a general way, like a typical LLM, but then they're able to like emphasize a certain concept. And so that raises the idea of like de-emphasizing certain concepts in a much more targeted way, not just like general behavior training, but actually modifying neuron weights to like de-emphasize maybe hate speech and a lot of other things that are a problem right now. So that's pretty fascinating. I need to again
That's
read the
pretty
full paper.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is fascinating. One second, my dog's
Okay.
yelling at the summer finale.
That's
One
right.
second here.
We're halfway on vacation already. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Another
text my kid real quick. Well, you keep
okay.
talking. I need to call my kid.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Another fascinating paper was from Zhang Shi. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I'll have to meet you sometime. But in a group out of, it's actually a whole group of people, but so et al. But this came out of Princeton and Google DeepMind. They show in research that they say the title of the paper is Safety Alignment Should Be Made More than Just a Few Tokens Deep. And so this is a different approach to like retraining in terms of safety. And again, I need to read this paper to understand a little more what the approach is. But they're basically saying that you can't just do a veneer of safety training and expect the model to actually be safe. You have to go deeper than that. Okay. The dog is still actively barking, it seems, at this point. So,
No,
and yeah,
I
yeah. Again, my argument in terms of the
can't hear it
inputs
at
was
all.
that it's obviously a lot different from traditional data engineering, where we do things like look at data types and look for very specific types of data. But I think a scoring based approach to data inputs, where we can score probability of hate speech or probability of copyrighted material or probability of other things that maybe we don't want to be training on or that we want to reduce training on, will also be part of the solution eventually. I think the other thing the argument we've heard is that these base models are so expensive to train. The quotes you hear are between 10 and $100 million, that there will only be a few of them in the future. But I think it's like anything, right? I think we're already seeing that we're figuring out better training approaches that will reduce those costs pretty dramatically. And also
Mhm.
the value of these models will be so high that will justify more specific training for certain topics and such.
Interesting. The issue of hate speech is interesting,
It is,
right?
yeah.
Because I feel like it's on one hand, I'm definitely for reducing the amount of garbage on the internet. At the same
Yeah.
time, um, one man's hate speech is another man's treasure, so to speak. So
Right.
what's a scale on it, right? Like you're going to score this, but then as we know, a lot of media and social media can be manipulated, right, by
Yep.
certain groups to push an agenda. So that's where I kind of
Yeah.
push back on it. Like, do you on one hand, you don't want to, basically Reddit or Twitter. You think you see the results of that when
Yeah.
you train models on that. But at the
Well,
same
not
time, these
everything on
conversations
Reddit or
are
Twitter,
happening.
right? Yeah.
Not everything, but I mean, it's
Yeah.
largely a garbage dump. I think you'll agree. So, I mean, there's reasons I'm not on Twitter or Reddit for that reason. I think that
Yeah.
they both really suck. So,
Well, and I hate to
um,
say it, but a lot of the speech discussion just comes down to corporate priorities, right? Like, what does the company that owns the model care about? And they're going to make their own decisions about what kinds of things to train on and what kinds of things to suppress.
Yep, that's exactly it. So I think
And that's
it's up to whatever agenda you have. I don't mean agenda in a bad way. It's just like, what are you trying to emphasize? What culture are you trying to have on your
right.
platform, for example, right? And I think this will
Exactly.
also be applicable to, say, small language models, where you start training, say, the
Yeah.
corpus of your company data, same sort of thing, right? Emails, um, chats, everything else, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's certain things in there I'm pretty sure that people don't mean to add to Slacks or emails, but they get in there. So,
Yeah. And that's another one, right? Private data. And that I talk about that as well. And I discuss that in the talk, where in data engineering, what do we do with private data? Well, often instead of just blocking it, instead of like dropping a record, we use masking techniques or randomization or substitution techniques. So for example, if you notice in a traditional record, say a chat that's being ingested into BigQuery, that someone put their social security number inappropriately in the chat, or their phone number, some PII, personally identifiable information, then you substitute it with a random fake social security number or fake phone number. And I think we can probably do the same thing with model training, with generative AI model training, right? So that, yes, it's trained on that actual data, that chat, that experience, but you're not leaking people's private data, which right now you totally are, right? It's not hard to demonstrate. We've seen many, many demos like this.
never happened. I've never seen that before. Not on
Yeah.
Google's latest
Gemini, release
yeah,
AI assistant.
Gemini,
Yeah.
and then they had
Yeah.
their what was it, their search results, I think.
Yeah,
I
it's
can't
like
remember
called
what it's
AI
called.
assistant or
Overview.
something. Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
AI overview. I think that's right,
it was
actually.
yeah. Anyway, it sucked pretty bad, but
Yeah.
anyway, it's cool. Yeah, so it must have been a fun talk for you. Um,
Yeah, good conference, fun talk, and
cool.
yeah. So it's
Yeah,
just a crazy time to be in this industry, let's be clear.
it's always a crazy time to be in the industry, though, right? I
It
mean, I think
is,
this,
but like, yeah.
yeah, it's. I know this is a Snowflake summit too. Everything was all AI all the time, so that was
Yeah.
pretty interesting. But
No, I mean, that's all anyone
Pepperoni
wants to talk
pizza,
about.
best ingredient ever. Yeah. Um, Ricotta cheese. It's not as good as glue. I'm just kidding. Um, but yeah, I thought that was a Snowflake summit was pretty
Yeah,
interesting. Like, all the talks AI, and it feels like now companies are now, I think, in the POC phase. Last year, it was definitely a lot of aspirational talks. Like, we could do anything
right.
with AI. I
Right.
think there's a lot of speculation now. It's you're starting to find people with use cases, and trying to actually figure out how this stuff's going to fit into workflows and hopefully make it to production. I guess that'll be the crux. I think there's going to be like anything. I think it comes down to the inputs. It comes down to the data.
Right. Right.
Um, but there's a lot of cases where I think you could use it, especially when you have like stuff where generative AI is really suitable. Like, for example, generating text, as
Yep.
from an input, so customer service, the obvious stuff, right? I think that there's also, I think people are starting to wise up a bit on what AI is and is not. I think last year everyone thought that ChatGPT was the same as using maybe traditional machine learning methods, and that's
Right.
obviously not at all true. Like, not even
Yeah.
close. So now I think people are starting to know the difference. I often joke there's a classical machine learning winter going on right now.
Well, it's
Um,
interesting because I feel like maybe we're coming back to using multiple techniques. So there's this company called, I think it's like John Snow Analytics, and
yeah, I've heard of them.
you know who they are. Yeah, so they work in the medical data space and they do things like analyze medical records. And back to what you were saying earlier about small language models, they use small language models that are very specialized for dealing with patient medical data, but they also use large language models and they also use traditional NLP techniques like using Spark to count words and calculate word statistics because they basically say, well, large language models are very expensive to run and they actually don't work well for a lot of tasks. And so you
Yeah.
choose, when you enter a query, it will choose what to use. Am I using a Spark model? Am I using my specialized small language model? Am I generating SQL using a large language model? And it will just channel to
Yeah.
the right one. We're going to see more of that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's the way you got to go. I mean, it's no different than what you did with ensemble learning back in the day.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
it's very, very, you just find the best fit and go for it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I can't remember what paper I was reading. Where they're talking about model routing and stuff, and I was like, this is
Interesting.
literally an old concept that that's being reinventing. But that's good. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's sort of the notion I'm exploring in my upcoming book, which what I call it mixed model arts. There's not one true way. There's many approaches, and so just know what works for your situation, right? And so that's turns out that's probably a good idea.
Well, and
But
it's reminiscent of previous eras of data hype, right? Like during the big data era, which we talk about a lot, it was all Hadoop all the time, right? Like, oh, it's going to replace everything. You won't need a data warehouse. And then a few years later, we're like, oh, yeah, actually, we need different tools to do different jobs. And not everyone wants to be writing pig jobs to run queries.
no way. Yeah, so I think that was one of the big takeaways that I had from Snowflake Summit was definitely there's a lot of interest still in AI, and they're
Yeah.
positioning themselves as a an AI company. The new CEO, chatted with
Yeah.
him for a while. Sridhar, good dude. Yeah, but the weird thing about this, I'll call this out. So the week before, Snowflake had that security incident that was widely reported.
Yeah.
Nobody talked about it. It was this
Yeah.
uncomfortable
Yeah.
thing where it's kind of like seeing somebody with a giant pimple on their forehead and you just like stare at it, but you don't want to say anything about it. Um, to put it, politely, I think security is much more a serious matter than that. But that's what it felt like. Everyone knew about it, but nobody would talk about it. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? And I've read various things about it. I've read that maybe it has more to do with specific malware going across after a whole spectrum of different customers at the same time than actual Snowflake security limitations. There are other people making different claims, but I think regardless, we're going to see some security policy changes at Snowflake, like some of these optional security things. Like two-factor are going to become more and more mandatory. Like you will not have the option to not enable them because they can't afford the black
Yep.
eye. Even if the customer screws up, or if really good malware attacks
Yep.
the customer and then it comes back on Snowflake. So
Yep. Exactly. So, um, got some questions here. Donnie asks, "What do you guys think about? What do you folks think about data literacy? Percentage of professional workforce knows enough to be dangerous with AI supporting data work." I think data literacy is pretty awesome, but that's my opinion. In fact, a good friend of mine, a good friend of ours, Jordan Morrow, actually lives here. He hates it when I call him the godfather of data literacy, but I think it's true. But data literacy is one of those things where it's an interesting term though, because I feel like it's somewhat overloaded. Um, but I think that it's never a bad thing to have your workforce, I think, more literate about data.
right.
I think the counter question of uh, you know why wouldn't you want data literacy? I think would be an interesting one to explore, but we don't have time for that. So
And I think one of the primary concerns right now is that anytime you make a tool more accessible, you also open the way for people to make bigger mistakes if they're not doing the homework to understand that tool. And so maybe with things like Gen AI SQL generation, right? You can have people running these complex queries where they understand nothing about what they're doing except they entered a question into ChatGPT and got a SQL query back.
for sure, and Jessica has a good point here. It's not just
Yeah.
data literacy; it's information literacy and AI
Yeah.
literacy. Like, I think we're so fixated on the data part, we miss out on the broader context, right? Of
Yeah. Yeah.
you have the data, information, knowledge, wisdom hierarchy. You got AI, which is none of the above in a lot of ways.
Agree.
So yeah, it's good. Let's see, Evo, what's up, dude? Since you mentioned Snowflake Summit and AI, I'm wondering, will Microsoft not buy Snowflake soon? Are there any good reasons not to? A little speculation never hurts, given where Snowflake is going and Microsoft in terms of data technologies. My take on this is that due to antitrust, Microsoft wouldn't do it. I could actually see AWS doing it though, and also with Databricks owning that.
Interesting.
I think that it would be an interesting one, but I think that Microsoft already has a black eye with antitrust. They probably wouldn't. But I could see AWS actually buying Snowflake if the share price goes down.
Yeah. Yeah. If they could pull it off, that would be
They
very
need well
interesting.
AWS. No, not to.
Go for it.
You know,
Go for it. You're trying to bite your tongue, aren't
I
you?
mean, Redshift needs a rebrand. Redshift.
Yeah.
I told people at AWS this before. I think that they should actually do away with Redshift and
Yeah.
rebrand it. I think it's one of these things where it's like the business mullet of technologies. It's a great technology. Don't get me wrong, but I think it has so many connotations attached to it that it's behind the times. Everything else, I think if they just I could see them getting some. I don't think Microsoft's going to do it though, but I think that it would be a good idea if they could. So
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting because I think AWS, well, Amazon more generally is under a lot of antitrust scrutiny too, but at least this would not make them dominate the retail space even more, which I think is the primary concern of regulators right now.
yeah, and as far as I know, Snowflake's built on Amazon. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's very, and as you said, Redshift is just it's they've added a lot of features, but it always feels a bit like Frankenstein's monster, right? They feel kind of
Yeah.
bolted on instead of feeling organically native. Like you always know that you're using an add-on feature rather than just using
Yep.
Redshift, which is the Snowflake experience. I'm
hmm
just using
And the
Snowflake. I don't really worry
configurations
about
and
it.
everything else about it is
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
whereas with Snowflake, I can just spin it up and do my thing. That's
And
it.
it
It's
runs.
super
Yeah. Yeah.
simple. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see. I don't know. It's a good
Yeah.
question. I don't
Yeah.
know what happens. But yeah, guess we'll find out. So yeah, other things in your mind, man. What else you we'll look at some questions here or comments.
I'm excited to see what the mood is like at Databricks. That's yeah.
What do
I
you mean
feel
the
like
mood?
well, okay. So, in my opinion, if you went back 2 years, I feel like at that point, Databricks was kind of on their back foot because the emphasis was all on the modern data stack, and Snowflake was just killing in that category. And yes, you could do data warehousing with Databricks. They had these, Unistore and other things, but it was awkward, and like you said just a minute ago about Redshift. It involved a lot more configuration. And then
Yep.
as soon as ChatGPT hit and the emphasis and the hype cycle shifted over to Gen AI, all of a sudden Databricks just pulled ahead because it was very
Yep.
clear that their product was more suitable for these general use cases like
Oh,
fine tuning
big
models,
time, dude. I mean,
pre-processing and such.
it's
Yeah,
always been the case where Snowflake's been sort of the enterprisey, business focused,
right.
data platform, right? It was
Yeah,
a data warehouse and became a data cloud. You couldn't say data warehouse anymore. Now it's AI and data cloud. Um, but Databricks on the other hand has always been, attached to data science. I remember using it back in 2014, 2015. It was just it
yeah,
was basically a better way to run Spark,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Killer notebooks, it was awesome, awesome product, right? But they, that's where it started from. Was the and Ali and Mate, they're ML big data guys. Like that's their DNA,
right.
and they're really good
Exactly.
at it.
Yeah,
Some of the best. They have some of the best people on the planet for that kind of stuff. So it's just different origins, right? So I mean, Databricks
yeah.
is uniquely suited to take advantage of the AI because that's literally what they were built to do
Yep.
from day one.
And the funny thing is, clear back, I think it was like 2017 when the Delta stuff started happening, and at that point, it was very clear that Databricks realized that they wanted to go hard after enterprise data warehousing, and they just never quite got there. Like you could do it, but it was always more awkward than Snowflake. And now I think in 2024, people just don't care as much. It's like, yeah, we'll have an enterprise data warehouse, but that's not where the money is going. That's not where the research is
That's not
going.
where the future is going either, right? Like analytics
Right.
has been one of these things where every company's been trying to do it for ages. And I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
great. If you can do it, good job. If you can't, you're just like the others that haven't done it
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, everything's moving beyond that at this point. Like that's the future is moving towards, um, you know, ML. It always has been actually, but this has been I mean, that's where I got my, cut my teeth is sort of a mix of analytics and ML, but like that's where it's all going now. So just operate at a scale that you can't do. I mean, it's interesting though. I feel like also some things I saw at Snowflake Summit, like there's I think Snowflake Analyst or something like that. I can't remember what it's called, but basically it's a LLM where you could just query Snowflake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So think of what that does to the BI ecosystem now. There's a bunch of every BI vendor is trying to do this. Snowflake just said, yeah, well, we also have that. So
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah,
So
I'm curious to see what happens at Snowflake over the next couple of years with the leadership changes because I think in the long term it's going to take time to like make a strategic pivot, but I think we will see it in time. And
yep.
then we'll have a real horse race within a couple of years.
Mhm. Omar asks, what's our take on the tabular acquisition by Databricks versus the Polaris catalog for iceberg tables from Snowflake? First of all, shout out to Ryan Blue and the and Brian Olson, the tabular team. Congrats on getting acquired. That's awesome. I'm super proud of you guys. So
Yeah.
that's the first thing I want to say about that. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I don't know thoughts. I mean, I'm curious to see what happens with open source and with Iceberg and Databricks. You don't just spend $1 billion to be a good Samaritan,
Right.
and
Right.
you're doing it for very strategic reasons. So
Yeah. I think the other thing to emphasize is that Iceberg itself is just a table format. And what I mean by that is that it's just a specification for storing tables using formats like Parquet in an object store like S3. And that means that you actually need a lot of ancillary tooling to make that work. In other words, your tools need to be able to talk to that table format, manage it, update it. Maybe you even need a faster metastore that runs on a traditional database so that your reads off S3 aren't so slow when you're trying to do lists of tables and such. Or just like do metadata type queries like counts and things. And so for me, that means there's still a huge opportunity here for other companies or other open source projects to build out all the tooling around Iceberg. And so I know like Prophecy, a bunch of different companies are working in that space. And obviously Tabular was very much working in that space. And so I think it's
well,
still
kind of created the space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. But there are other companies doing similar things.
Yeah,
including
Upsolver's another one
Snowflake.
doing some stuff. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, it would be interesting. But yeah, I think Polaris was an interesting one, the catalog, and so I think that was. I don't know the background story, so I'm not going to speculate too much. But I'd heard that it was basically sort of the sort of the pushback to the upcoming announcement of the Tabular acquisition. So Snowflake announced their Polaris catalog. It's more of a REST catalog really for the data. It's not really a data catalog per se, but just a way you can interact better with with Iceberg. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah, I don't know. So let's see here. Any other comments? Kieran has a very long one, but we'll try and answer it. Cortex is interesting. Chat with the data type products are dependent on the existence of a YAML-based semantic layer. Snowflake seems to have their YAML-based. Yep. Yeah, the products do too. What's the future of the semantic layer and many different YAML specs? I don't know. What do you think?
That's a good question. I think there's still a space for a lot of these things too. Well, when I say a lot of these things, I'm talking about all the traditional parts of data. I don't think those are going away. Things like your semantic layer, maybe a little bit of a more modern reinterpretation of things that people have been doing for some time. But yeah, I think there's absolutely a place for that. And I suppose if you're to your ideas, Joe, if you have a better data model and a better semantic layer, then theoretically the LLMs would be able to do a better job of auto-generating queries.
It definitely helps provide the context.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious. I think it's just going to be sort of. I've always had a problem with where the semantic layer sits, though.
Yeah.
I always felt that it needs to be more upstream, actually, at the source.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I've been envisioning basically kind of a universal semantic layer that covers basically the end-to-end, data lifecycle. It's something I've been thinking a lot about. That might be a part of my book. I don't know. Because I feel like that's what's going to tie everything together, right? It's sort of just universal metadata. Because I always felt like semantic layer is nice, but it also doesn't really solve the problem of definitions. It only makes it analysts a bit easier. But anyway, we've got our special guest here. You may know her, or I'll just bring her on. Hi.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
How's it going? How you doing?
Good. How's my audio? Because I'm just using my computers.
It's fine. Yeah.
It's fine. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great to see you both.
Yeah. We're all live right now.
Yeah,
so anyway, this is Zhamak Dehghani. I guess for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. I'm Zhamak. I guess my 30 second to fame is I'm known as the creator of Data Mesh. I'm currently the founder CEO of NextData, building a technology to enable Data Mesh.
Super cool.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to join us. Oh, sorry, Joe.
I was looking at the comments. People are excited you're here, so welcome. Yeah, let's get into it. So, I mean, you wrote the Data Mesh blog post. What was it, 2018, 2019? Then wrote the book, started a company. What's the state of Data Mesh right now?
Yeah, great question. So I guess in the span of these few years, I've talked to about 500 companies 500 large companies, 5,000 kind of employees and above. And all of them are doing some form of data mesh, whether they call it data mesh or not. They are moving toward giving the ownership and management of data end to end for analytics and AI to domains. I hardly talk to any organization that says, you know what, we are doing a transformation. We're going to put all of our data in the lake or warehouse, even though they may, of course, use lake and warehouse as a technology. I think what data mesh did, it sets a trend and a wave toward this future of decentrally owning and managing data within the organizations. That's kind of, I guess I see that ubiquitously across large organizations where they have really felt the pain of centrally managing data for this kind of very diverse, very fragmented, business-oriented, kind of domain-oriented setup that they have. And then when you talk to those folks, what has happened in the last few years, we saw, I guess, a big push in terms of first implementers, right? We saw the first generation technologies that were technologies that already existed, and they thought, okay, they saw the demand for kind of data meshy transformations, and they thought, how can we change our technology to support that? So we see kind of incremental shifts and improvements, like catalogs use the language of domain and data products. Even kind of federated query engines use that to demonstrate views with metadata around data products. So data products became a language that reintroduced and I guess got rejuvenated as part of data mesh, and it's that's also ubiquitous. However, really where organizations struggle still today is that true distributed ownership, true distributed nature of data management. And what has happened, what I see is that a lot of organizations started building their own do-it-yourself, bring your own, build your own homegrown layer on top of the existing infrastructure to somewhat give autonomy to the domains. But it's a very, very, very big task because these kind of organizations have fragmented and very heterogeneous infrastructure. So the very first step that they've taken is, okay, let us put some automation around, teams accessing the storage or teams accessing the compute or securing the boundary of the database that they're using. But that's hardly enough to give autonomy to domains. So in best case scenarios where we've seen, a very tight collaboration with a big vendor and do-it-yourself layer on top, 40% of the data practitioners have been enabled, and that 40% are majority still did fall into the category of data engineering. So that experience layer for domains to be autonomously working with data is still lacking. But I think people are very hopeful, like anyone from the largest enterprise in the world to the kind of mid-sized organizations, they are still on the journey of data democratization.
Yeah, this totally makes sense to me. I mean, reading your book, that was kind of my comment, that it would be helpful to have tools to do a lot of these things for people so they can just concentrate on the one domain that they're responsible for. Because otherwise, I think you still need a big service team, right? Like you decentralize the data itself, but you still need a service team to kind of pull all the pieces together. And so if eventually we have a tool set that can take a lot of that burden off these separate companies in a standardized way, just like the data warehouse itself, right? You generally don't build that yourself. You maybe if you're Google or something, you have a service team that does it, but you just want to buy that off the shelf.
Yeah, and Matt, I think I love the expression that you just said there. You said you need a team to hold all the pieces together, because when you think about what constitutes, at least in my vision, a data product, it's soup to nuts of the data ecosystem. Imagine like you are doing, providing sales information, and you're the team responsible for providing that. Just a simple ROI data product, let's say, you've got to maintain pipelines, codes that are generating the data. Sorry, I just realized my screen did a
Okay.
flash. If it did that again, I'll have some trick to fix it, but maybe it's just momentarily.
We didn't see it on our end, so I think we're good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so what is that team? What that sales kind of data domain team is responsible for? They have to write the code, whether it's SQL, Python, no code, low code, doesn't matter. They have to maintain the code that's generating the ROI. They have to define their dependencies to any upstream the data they're receiving. So they have to have that ingestion mechanism and access mechanism. They need to be able to provide metadata around the sales information. They need to provide, health information. They need to provide semantic linkage to how does this ROI links to actually all of these other data sets across the universe of that. They need that already discoverable. So there's a lot that goes into managing this and orchestrating all these pieces. And in fact, like that's been my mission. Our mission has been, how can we put data ecosystem in a box in a way, and orchestrate all the pieces of that box, and then give a very, very simple experience to building and managing kind of or utilizing the stuff in the box to provide the soup to nuts of end-to-end. That soup to nuts is needed to end-to-end own that data and code and metadata, all of it, right? As one unit. And I think that was a very brilliant way of a great observation to put it together.
Good job, Matt. But I mean, you do have a good point too. I feel like the data tooling ecosystem right now, it's super, super fragmented. The notion of interoperability is non-existent. It just isn't there, right? So even if you try and do, say, data mesh, it's at best you're doing probably some Walmart version of it. It's not going to be there. It's just going to be cobbling together a bunch of whatever you can find.
I agree, and I think we are, we kind of constantly live in these two extreme poles of complete chaos and absolute order. And none of those ends of these poles are realistic, right? So we went to the modern data stack. I think we do have very, very low level interoperability, like with, the news around kind of iceberg tables or Arrow or, kind of at a very low level. If I want to kind of, maybe it's a bit of a harsh analogy, but in my mind, it feels like we're still trying to figure out what's the Ethernet level standardization. Forget TCP, IP, and HTTP, right? Forget the application layer standardization. So we're still, across the vendors, we're still trying to figure out what is the lowest level of this stack that we need to standardize in this like data format. And I don't think users should even care about that. That should be completely abstracted away, the same way you and I don't care about going through 5 layers of TCP right now and talk to each other, right? The applications just work. So we have this kind of very fragmented end of the spectrum, little kind of interoperability at a very, very low level of the stack that is still not enabling innovation at the application layer. Or you see the big vendors going, I'm going to smear a big fat, management tool of catalog on top of it to give you an illusion of order, right? And constant order as you build it, buy into my tool. And of course they support, I mean, it's a bit of an exaggeration because I want to make a point. Of course they do support data off their own platform to some degree, but nonetheless it's a last mile problem that you try to fix, and we still have to fix the first other 99 miles of data production. So we are constantly shifting to the back and forth to this like extreme poles, and I think what's needed is some level of standardization at the higher layers of stack, not the table layer, but just at the experience layer, so we can innovate building solutions on top. And guess what? Since this year, now we have to cater for a very rapidly evolving ways of using data for Gen AI that we hadn't imagined. I mean, if we were tapping into 10% structured data, we're going to be tapping to the 90% very unstructured data for the Gen AI. So the problem just exacerbated itself, exponentially.
So I guess say what you can about what you're doing at NextData, but I think the big question mark is what are you working on right now?
Yeah, I wish I could say a lot more because we're still pre-GA, so we still haven't actually released the product publicly. What we're working on is that kind of data product in a box. We are working on, I mean, it's in my book, in fact, like go to the ending chapters of the book. You will see a version of that. I mean, the thinking has evolved quite a bit since then, but it's pretty much that. Like we thought about how can we put data ecosystem in a box in a way that it abstracts a lot of complexity for users and generate and create an experience on top of it to manage the life cycle of your data ecosystem in a box and build data products. But we had to solve, because as you said, Joe, there isn't a whole lot of standards. I wish we were building this product like 5 years from now, 3 years from now, because the lack of standards means we have to assume that we will be standardizing some of these kind of higher layers around, discoverability and, dependency management between your data products. So what we're building is, again, a poor analogy, but what Docker and Kubernetes did for applications, we're trying to do that for the data ecosystem. So if somebody wants to build a data product, just like I said, ROI, let's say calculation, they have a very simple programmatic or UI, like, people on a spectrum, like not everybody writes Python, somebody just likes the YAML, somebody, some people like the UI. So you have a kind of a spectrum of user interface and user facing and kind of APIs to build, share, manage, and discover your data product, which constitutes of policies that applies to it, metadata that makes it understandable, semantic definition, model definition, the contracts both on the consuming side and serving side. There's a whole lot that goes into that container. So we focused a lot of time on that data product containerization and then the runtime orchestration, because at the end of the day, these are not static artifacts. You've got to run the code. You've got to push the transformation, like orchestrate the transformation. If it's on Spark, on Spark. If it's on Snowflake, on Snowflake. Is this just plain old good pandas and Python and some compute be able to do that? And then it's not good enough to go and say, hey, enterprise, we've got you a container, because you have to build some experience on top of it so people can start using it. So then we have a kind of a discovery layer on top, which you can swap out with anything, because whatever we build is API based. But we have a pretty, I'm very proud of it. Very, very pretty, beautiful kind of graph-like and search experience. And like any other product that's built these days, we have put GenAI into that, because we realized that you can't just, go to an organization. So great, you've got all this brownfield data and code that's sitting around in pipelines. Forget about those. Let's just start bringing free, and that's not a reality. So we're using GenAI to kind of cold bootstrap from existing assets. So it's a lot going on, and we wish that there were more standards that we could just plug in, and we didn't have to like constantly try to define something that hopefully becomes a pseudo standard in future for the different facets of that data product.
So let me ask you this. I think one of the big challenges in this domain, and maybe you're already running into this, is incentivizing all the different players to work together. Well, what's the quote, Joe? Show me an incentive and I'll show you an outcome. Is that Upton Sinclair that you're fond of quoting?
That was Charlie Munger.
Charlie Munger. Okay, yeah. So basically, from your perspective, how do you incentivize companies to play nice together if you're the company that's trying to get them to to glue all the pieces together?
Yeah, so I think, in fact, it's when you first start, you're nobody. You have no power to convince anybody to work together. You have to become somebody for that to happen. So in fact, when you start, you're the little dog. So what you have to do is to basically carry the complexity of that seamless experience and make it really, really simple for users. So that's why DIY often fails, because if you're just an organization and try to build this orchestration yourself, it's very, very complex when you put the matrix of kind of multidimensional matrix of all these technologies that need to play nicely together, like your transport, your compute, your storage, and so on. So I think when you first start, our job right now is hide the complexity and carry that load ourselves, and make sure from the user perspective, it still feels seamless. And then, once you then open source and create open standards, hopefully the adoption of that standard motivates the vendors to collaborate around it, like this, what we're seeing right now, and usually sparked by competition, right? Snowflake, Databricks, like, because of that fierce competition, the part of that competition requires a standardization on something in common across them. So I think there is, and we're not an open source, like we didn't start the company from, years of building the software in some big tech company. We're building from scratch. So I think we're still a little bit away from that point, but I'm really, really hopeful. I'm really hopeful that we are, building the most non-disruptive disruptive technology in a way that it doesn't disrupt the user and organizations, but it disrupts the way we think and imagine data creation, data production experience should look like.
Oh, it would be huge when it comes into fruition. I always said, I think to you and Matt, it feels like it would completely invert the entire paradigm of how we've been doing data. Absolutely, just like alter the entire universe. So that's all that would happen. It's fine.
I do hope so. Our first, very, very first kind and trusting customer is going to production this quarter. So we are very excited to see like real data going through, real code and production metadata going through our application. So it's for a startup, this is a huge moment, and we are working with kind of a handful of early adopters, and hopefully we can go to market early next year with good stories and successful stories to share.
That's super cool. Actually, Ole has a question here.
Sure.
What do you think of the standards that have actually been put forward in the data mesh community? Asking as a complete tech agnostic smiley face.
Sure. I'm not familiar with many of them. I know there is a data product specification, a couple of like different projects that they thought put a data product specification forward. If you know of any, please let me know. Maybe I'm behind. I've been busy, I guess, operationally in house, and I think I didn't see anything that I thought is simple enough and seamless enough and in abstract complexity. What I saw was really a declaration of a lot of different attributes that allows you to automate infrastructure provisioning. That's pretty much it. I haven't seen any standard that completely encapsulates not only build time concerns that you have, as in what infrastructure do I need to provision before if I write my transformation or my domain, but also how do I describe my runtime kind of dependencies. I've seen bits and pieces coming out, like for contracts, maybe for the declaration of the build time dependencies, but I haven't seen that kind of the overarching orchestration piece. Still, expecting to kind of a very naive user to be able to use it. But I'm very hopeful. I mean, this is great. I mean, any standard, any effort, because it's just a step forward, right? If it's not great, we will evolve it. It will get evolved and iterated. So I'm very happy that these things are coming out. I guess I haven't been super close to them.
Yeah, I love this idea of non-disruptive disruption. I think you said it, something along those lines. Because if you think about the most impactful technologies, you go way back to the 80s, graphical user interfaces came out. And the whole thing was that people used computers a lot more because they didn't have to think about them. Same thing with your phone, but this is for better and worse. The reason it's so addictive is because you really don't think about it much, right?
Exactly.
You just interact with it and do things. So having the same thing for data sounds fantastic.
Yeah. First, shout out to Scott Harleman. This is not my words. These are his words. I was telling him, like, we were talking about these 4 S's of kind of principles of us building this product, and I'm happy to share that in a minute. And he said, the way I've been telling people is that you're building a non-disruptive disruptive. So Scott Hellerman's words, not mine. He's a lot more creative than I am. In terms of the like how we imagine, like what are the parameters that constitute that non-disruptive disruptive technology. Matt, I think going back to, again, what you said, if you go back to technologies that just seamlessly sneaked into our lives and completely changed the way we live and work, first and foremost, a lot of them were based on decentralized technologies, Unix, internet, smartphones, APIs, and so on, right? And if you kind of unwrap the technology and look underneath and see what are the common characteristics that they all had, first and foremost, they were standardized, right? There was some standardization that created a set of standardization that created automation. That's what we like to do. The second is seamless. The second S is it just seamlessly found its way to our lives without really trying to change our behavior completely. So I think that seamless nature and removing friction is really, really key. The third one is that it's very small. So we've tried so hard to build this kind of data product containerization orchestration as the smallest piece of software that can replicate itself. Of course, you have one per. Like right now, we have 100 meg Rust code. It's mighty code. It does a ton of stuff, but it's a tiny, tiny binary that gives life to your data product, right? Of course, we don't do the actual compute and the actual storage. We delegate all of that to, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Delegate it underneath. But that code that does the contracts and metadata and orchestration of infrastructure is super, super small. So and finally, simple, right? An interface has to be super simple. So standard, seamless, small, and simple.
That's awesome. The 4S's. I've never heard that before. I like it.
But we made it up recently.
Made it up. It's a great blog post. I don't know. So, actually, Ryan Duffy has a question here. What do you think about the various definitions of what a data product is? There's analytical data products, foundational, master data products, integrated products, even dashboards as data products. What do you I actually have this question too. It seems like the word data product has sort of been.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good thing, right? So I define data product as initially, right, as those, again, sorry, the word data product existed in the literature. Again, I reused it and rejuvenated it with in the context of data mesh. I think that's the definition that took off now, adopted by Gartners and various kind of people in the industry. I'm on across those 8 characteristics, short DAV units, discoverable, addressable, just it's in the book. And in fact, I see it on the marketing content of every website that has, not every, but a lot of vendors that have something to do with data products, those 8 characteristics. Look, we're doing these 8 characteristics. It's a data product, which is great, right? And that was intentional to not dictate or prescribe kind of the mechanics of it, right? But I think what happened was we built static kind of data-only data products. A lot of the data products that we have, like this analytical or databases or views or entries in catalogs, they're still seeing the data product as a last mile artifact that gets then published and somehow becomes a product. I think our implementation, I think that's fine. That's great. If industry wants to think about, intersection of data and product thinking, fantastic. But the definition, I suppose, that was really in the back of my mind as I was writing that, let's say implementation, was more of a computational unit. I truly believe the separation of data compute, not at the physical layer, but at the logical layer, as in your code is in some pipeline somewhere and the byproduct of that code is somewhere else and try to be productized. That's a source of evil for a lot of, that's a source of headache for a lot of the data pipelining world, right? So bringing those together as one unit and have this computational programmable unit as a data product is key. So I guess that's kind of the definition of implementation we're taking. But I think the diversity of imagination and adopting the principles at different points is fine. If overreaching marketing to market that as a silver bullet, probably not as fine.
Never seen that happen. Never saw it happen with data mesh either. I'm just kidding. Cool. Kind of closing out. Do you have anything coming up that you might want to share?
Yeah. Well, we are doing a private preview with a few folks this week, so we will definitely share our learnings on our site. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We still probably have a couple of spots left for Wednesday afternoon. We took advantage of people coming to San Francisco because of Data AI Summit, which is an amazing summit for people to attend. And we have a couple of sessions kind of before and after the main events for people. If they are going to Moscone Center, we also provide commute and transport for you. And then we will publish a bit more. We have the Point of View website that we launched, our Point of View at the top of that link. And we're hoping to publish a lot more about the product, about the company. So stay tuned for after the event. And if you're also curious, if you want to use the product in your organization, and you do have those pain points, and those pain points are acute, if you click that get early access, we get back to you very quickly and set up time to meet with you. I guess that's all the marketing. I'm the head of marketing and sales right now, as you can imagine. I could do in this short time.
Well,
yeah,
thank you.
I wish it was last week too, because I was in San Francisco last week. I was going to make it this week. My kid's birthday is coming up, and I'm not going to.
Another time.
That, but,
we'll certainly do this in a webinar format. We're still a bit shy because,
makes sense.
Too early.
Yeah. But no, congratulations on this milestone. This is fantastic, even if it's early.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Zhamak. It's good to chat with you as always. So we'll see you around. So
thank you so much for hosting me. I know this is your last session before summer, so I'm very, very grateful for this time.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thanks to the audience out there. Hope you all have a good summer. We'll see you back, I guess, in the fall, whenever that happens. So, you have any fun summer plans, Matt?
That's a good question. A family reunion, just nothing too huge at the moment. How about you? I believe you're planning to go to Europe, correct?
Yeah, take my kids to a couple weeks in Europe. That'll be a lot of fun. Other than that, I just have two kids I watch during the day. So it's
need
gonna
to
be
hang
a lot
out
of fun.
with.
Yeah, but they're basically grown at this point, so they just do their own thing. So I got them all phones. They can just call if they need anything. But
so it's like the 80s, except with cell phones. Like, you're not a helicopter parent. You're telling me.
I am not a helicopter parent.
It's just like Stranger Things. They're solving crimes.
No, the kids are more like they're definitely out of Stranger Things. It's pretty cool to see. But awesome. Well, thanks to the audience out there. We'll see you back in the fall. We'll make some announcements when we're going to get back on it. We've got actually a really awesome lineup that I'm stoked about, but not going to say too much yet. So anyway, the other stuff coming, I'll be still working on the book, Practical Data Modeling. You can follow early drafts at practicaldatamodeling.substack.com. I also have a regular blog and newsletter at joereese.substack.com. So anyway, if you're into that kind of stuff, go check it out. Got a course on Coursera that's coming out this summer as well. So stay tuned for that. They'll be dropping. It's gonna be hot. Auntie asked, when is Joe not planning to come to Europe? I think I spend more time in Europe than I do in the United States. This is
they're going to change your residency.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually looking at apartments there. So
okay.
Well, awesome, Matt. We'll see you around, and thanks to the audience. We'll see you later.
Good.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.